This is James Clerk Maxwell. And in 1867, he proposed the theory of electromagnetism in what is now known as Maxwell's equations. This is what gave us our first hint towards the existence of radio waves. Only a short 20 years later, in 1887, physicist Heinrich Hertz demonstrated the reality of this by experimentally generating electromagnetic waves in his lab that had a lower frequency than light. Yes, the waves he generated were radio waves. This type of wave typically has frequencies below 300 gigahertz and have lengths of at least 1 millimeter, though they can get much longer, reaching over 100 meters in length. As we all likely know, though, this has turned into a form of communication and entertainment that is still used today. Around 1894 to 1895, I'm going to butcher this, inventor Guglielmo Marconi. I'll put it up on the screen. There's no way I didn't butcher that. Anyway, he developed the first practical radio transmitters and receivers, and from there, well, the rest is history. But what if I told you that we were not the first to the party of generating and essentially broadcasting radio waves? In fact, we are probably one of the latest. Astronomical sources in our universe have been releasing radio waves for billions of years. By our current understanding, probably even over 13 billion years, as they come around rather shortly after the Big Bang. Like, we start observing them shortly after the Big Bang. And we can build telescopes that allow us to study these radio waves and their sources. But, as I mentioned, we are kind of, already filling our own sky with radio waves? So how do we get around this, right? How do we separate the noise that we're generating and other noise in general, overall, from the data that we are seeking? One answer to this question is to create a radio silent zone with which to use our telescopes. And that is exactly what we did in Green Bank, West Virginia, home of the Green Bank Observatory. Before we proceed, I would like to talk a little bit about the inspiration for this video. So, as some of you may know, I volunteer for an observatory in my area. A big part of the reason why I have my channel is to help myself with the public outreach aspect of working at an observatory centered around public outreach. And we were recently selected for an early screening of a movie called Small Town Universe, which I really, really enjoyed. I got to play like a part of making sure the whole screening went off successfully, and overall we had a really good turnout. This movie offered me a perspective on life in a place like Green Bank that I almost certainly would never have had otherwise. Like an outlook I'd never been able to form. Yes, it is important for science and the furthering of the field of radio astronomy, but it truly is more than that, offering a unique community to people in a world where everything is just so loud and overbearing. As I watched it, I knew I had to make a video about not only what the movie taught me, but kind of about Green Bank itself. And with that, let's turn our attention to the year 1958. This was the year that the Federal Communications Commission established the National Radio Quiet Zone. And this is one of the main parts of what makes this location so unique. This zone is a 13,000 square mile area that is restricting the transmission of radio waves. Now, in the 1950s, when radio technology was more limited, it posed a minor threat of interference. But today, the story is vastly different. Over 95% of US adults own a cell phone, and that creates a lot of interference. And as you may have guessed, that is not the only source either. Radios, routers, wireless controllers, we have a whole Internet of Things now, all creating electrical and radio interference. So, in this area, to preserve the radio quiet zone for scientific research, things like these are generally banned, though it is hard to enforce the removal of everything. You might be wondering, though, why was Green Bank selected for the radio quiet zone in the first place? Unlike visual light observatories, which we usually put on the top of mountains to help reduce how much atmosphere we're looking through, when it comes to radio astronomy, these needs are different. For this, the observatory being surrounded by mountains helps to block out surrounding radio noise, like more far-off radio noise. To help select a location like this, the NRAO conducted surveys in over 30 locations spanning 5 eastern states. Of these, the valley of Deer Creek was found to be well shielded from outside electrical noises, and within this valley rested the town of Green Bank. And so, here, the U.S. National Science Foundation built the Green Bank Observatory and cited it as one of the protections within the radio quiet zone. Now, some people, of course, find the restrictions annoying, while others see it as like an actual defining way of life in Green Bank. Either way, it is a necessary part of our scientific study. If the radio signals we are trying to capture and study come, say, only once, or even intermittently over a long period of time, all it takes is one source of interference blocking it, and we might just miss it forever. This radio quiet zone also offers benefits to people who may not even directly be tied with the observatory. One of the things I learned from Small Town Universe is that some people experience something known as EHS, or electromagnetic hypersensitivity, which, from what I could find, we don't currently fully understand. But what we do understand and have been able to observe is that its symptoms are real and they're evident. These symptoms can include things like tiredness, dizziness, nausea, heart and digestive troubles, and dermatological symptoms such as redness, tingling, and burning sensations. In some individuals, these effects are so great they become debilitating in pretty much every way. The zone offers them a place where they can live both more normally and easily than they could anywhere else, at least in the United States anyway. So while I, as a millennial, an IT professional, a gamer, the guy on the internet talking to you right now, can understand the potential frustrations one might experience while living in the radio quiet zone, I feel it is important for us to keep it not only for radio astronomy and overall astronomical discoveries, but for those who can't easily live elsewhere, and even as just a reminder to slow down sometimes in this fast-paced world. And this brings us to the observatory itself. What telescopes and equipment does it have? And what are some of the things it has been studying up until this point? Well, to start, who does not love large telescopes? I, at the very least, love large telescopes. And well, radio telescopes just might be the kings of size. One reason for this is to match the resolution one might get from an optical telescope. In order to do this with radio waves, we need larger detectors on our telescopes that are capable of gathering high-quality radio data from the waves that are frequently low in power. Our first telescope for the day is the 13.7 meter telescope. And for those of us in the US, that is 45 feet. Built in 1995, this telescope's purpose was to aid NASA in the tracking of satellites. Today, it is used to monitor the sun. Access to publicly available quality dynamic spectra of the sun, taken during daylight hours, can be found here and is meant to help with research to anyone who needs it. And of the telescopes, well, you see, this one is the smallest. Next up, we have the 20-meter telescope, which is 65 feet. And this one was funded by the United States Naval Observatory, or the USNO, and it allowed them to participate in an international effort to measure the Earth's rotation and orientation in space. This helped us gain things like data on the Earth's wobble and changes in its rotational axis. It helps out with this by tracking radio waves from distant quasars with a network of widely separated radio telescopes around the globe. The 20-meter at Green Bank being one of those telescopes. Budget cuts would come to happen at the USNO though, and the program was shut down in June of 2000. The telescope though lives on. Now it is being used as an educational telescope and as a test telescope for new and upcoming technologies. Going even bigger in size, we have a trio of 26-meter telescopes, 85 feet, known as 85-1, 85-2, and you guessed it, 85-3. The three telescopes helped us with radio astronomy research, and the first one was built in 1958. While they could operate independently, they could also be used together as a 3-element interferometer. Unfortunately, the last use these telescopes saw ended in 2000, and as of the time of this recording, all three need some level of refurbishment before they can become fully operational again. But before we get into the truly gargantuan telescopes found at Green Bank Observatory, let's touch a little bit more on its history. Like how it was not always called by this name. In fact, it started out as the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, Green Bank. And you may recognize the first part of that as the NRAO. And it was that way for a long time too, from its construction starting in 1956 all the way up to 2016. And for a period of this time, it even served as the NRAO's main headquarters, main base of operations. But by now you might be asking, well, Joe, what changed? And to answer this, let's first look at the year 2012. At this time, a proposal was submitted stating that the NSF, the National Science Foundation, should fully divest itself from the facility by 2016. This put the observatory in a bit of a predicament, as if it lost its funding, it would no longer be able to operate. As part of this process, a few options were listed. These options included collaboration with interested parties for continued science and education-focused operations with reduced NSF funding. This would come to be the preferred alternative. Collaboration with interested parties for operation as a technology and education park. Mothballing the facilities which basically means the suspension of operations in a manner such that operations could resume efficiently at some future date, or demolition and site restoration, where the site was just totally demolished and restored. And the last one is continued NSF investment for science-focused operations, so that's if nothing had changed. You likely noticed that one of these options was the demolition of the observatory along with restoration to the area. Had this outcome occurred, it would have created a knock-on effect felt by not only those involved with the observatory directly, but also those who relied on the science it performed, and everyone there who lives in the town of Green Bank, which in some ways relies on the observatory to keep going. So again, had this occurred, it would have affected a lot of people. Let me tell you, if this was the outcome though, the tone of this video would be very different. What they, and we, the science community, did get though, was possibly the best outcome we could have asked for, which was the first option. During the hearings for this, many passionate people came forward to defend the observatory and really highlight all of its benefits. This, along with the observatory's efforts to gain private contracts and even form a partnership with West Virginia University, meant that come 2016, the observatory was able to go independent under the name Green Bank Observatory, with a number of funding sources, which did still include the NFS, just in a reduced capacity. Which means we get to talk about more big telescopes. This here is the 43 meter foot telescope. Wait a second. Did he say meter foot? What's a meter foot? What is a meter foot? A metrical foot is a group of syllables in a poem that have a specific emphasis and form the basic unit of poetic rhythm. That doesn't make any sense. I don't think this guy knows what he's talking about. Which is 140 feet. And part of what makes it unique is the fact that it has an equatorial mount. These mounts are better with tracking at the zenith, directly above, than say an alt-azimuth mount. This means that the telescope does not need to avoid studying some of the areas at the zenith because it has an easier time tracking there. It seems that when the NRAO first started up, there was an understanding, or maybe even expectation, that fairly quickly it should be able to offer a large, single-dish radio telescope that scientists across the world could use to gather data. While this telescope did face some setbacks due to the challenges behind such a large polar-mounted telescope, even from its earliest observations, it proved to be well worth the wait. In 1999, this came to an end, as the telescope was retired as a general use facility, though only 6 years later, in 2005, the telescope was put back into use, this time as part of a satellite tracking program. And that is not even the largest telescope this facility has. Allow me to introduce you to the 100 meter or 328 foot Green Bank telescope. Completed in the year 2000, it is the world's largest fully steerable radio telescope. It did this by slimly beating out the Effelsberg 100 meter radio telescope found in Aarhus, Germany. I'm going to put that on the screen because I'm sure I said it wrong. It held the title taken by the Green Bank telescope for 29 years. Green Bank took this one only because of its slightly elliptical 100 by 110 meter aperture. And let me tell you, it makes full use of that monstrous aperture size. It operates at meter to millimeter wavelengths, giving it a detection range of 0.01 to 116 gigahertz. Given it's fully steerable, it can access about 85% of the local celestial hemisphere. So it really can study a lot of sources, both in regards to their spot in our sky and in regards to the wavelengths within the radio spectrum that they are giving off. The overall flexibility of this telescope means it can respond quickly to new scientific ideas or things that need to be studied, and it can even be configured with new and experimental hardware when needed. During each year, the GB telescope is used for astronomy for around 6,500 hours, with 2,000 to 3,000 of those hours going to science done in the higher frequency ranges. What you've been seeing on screen are different parts of this colossal telescope. And there have been other telescopes in the past at Green Bank, but for this video, these are the 5 I wanted to go over. And while these telescopes are aiding with science all over the world, there is one group I would like to highlight today. They are doing science that one might not expect, and they are directly involved with some of the people whose stories are told in Small Town Universe. What group am I referring to? It is known as SETI, or the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. The program here that both SETI and the Observatory are involved in is known as the Breakthrough Listen Project. It started in January of 2016 and has been searching for extraterrestrial communications in our universe. One of the ways it is doing this is with radio waves. And one of its primary sources for gathering these radio waves, this radio data, is the Green Bank telescope. Be it here in our own backyard or out there somewhere in the universe, I believe I would be a mix of excited and maybe terrified if we were to find life outside of our planet. I think depending on the nature of the life that we found. And if we're going to find anything like this outside of our solar system, the group that's probably going to do that will be SETI. What we now know as the SETI Institute began with just one small project by NASA. It had only 2 people, founder Tom Pearson and astronomer Jill Tarter, and it was called the SETI program. Today, the Institute has grown to around 100 scientists who are supported by specialists in administration, education, and outreach, which I think is, especially that education and outreach, is something that I think is very important for science to have. I only recently became familiar with radio astronomy. In fact, you can see my first video on it right here. It'll be somewhere on the screen. But Green Bank, its story, facilities, and the science it does all flew under my radar. So this video, if nothing else, is a show of my appreciation for Green Bank, its community, workers, and partners who are helping to advance our understanding of the universe, along with everyone involved in the creation of Small Town Universe, and for the fact that I was able to play a small part in its unveiling to the world. If you get a chance to check it out in your area, I highly recommend it. And if you like my videos, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out. And who knows, maybe even hit that bell icon. And as always, let us all step outside tonight and look towards the stars.